Welcome to Healthiest Tech Talks, where we're talking about some of the biggest challenges facing healthcare organizations today and how technology can transform the way that we work so that patients can receive better care. I'm your host, Curtis Hendrick, Senior Vice President of Cloud and Digital Transformation at Optimum Healthcare IT. Let's dive in.
All right, welcome. Thanks everybody for joining us. We've got a pretty exciting topic today that I think a lot of folks are talking about already in the industry, but there's a lot of questions about it. I think is going to be a very interesting topic. We've got some awesome people here to dive into this topic with us. And so let me go ahead and do a quick introduction and talk to some of the folks that we've joined here with us today. So first to start off, Mr. Nickolas Raker, Epic Global Black Belt for Microsoft. Very interesting title. I'm kind of curious what that involves. So maybe give us a little bit of intro on yourself, a little bit of your background, a little bit of your responsibilities, what you do, and maybe what a Epic Global Black Belt is.
For sure. Well, thank you for having me, Curtis. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Nickolas Raker. So I am Epic Global Black Belt, as Curtis stated. Doesn't mean that we're ninjas, though, unfortunately. Here at Microsoft, I focus on helping healthcare organizations modernize their infrastructure and their application delivery, especially around Epic on Azure and virtual desktop strategies. I spend the majority of my time working at that intersection of healthcare and technology, partnering with health systems to improve clinical systems, clinical workflows, and enhance security, drive operational efficiency, and throughout their cloud innovation journey. My background includes deep expertise in both provider and payer systems. And I've had the privilege of supporting some of the largest Epic environments in the United States. Fun fact about me is if I'm not talking about Epic on Azure, I'm either walking my dog or playing golf. And no, I have never gotten a hole in one yet.
What's your handicap? Anything good?
I don't even know.
All right, fair enough. Well, Nick, thanks for joining us. Nick, I work closely with Nick on a lot of projects, on a lot of customers, and Nick is an excellent resource at Microsoft to help see good outcomes with our customers. So I appreciate you joining us here today, Nick. We're also joined by Jacob Schmidt from Baptist Memorial. Jacob, same to you. Give us the intro, give us your background, introduce yourself to everybody, and hit us with a fun fact as well, too.
All right. Well, like Curtis said, my name is Jacob Schmidt. I'm the Senior Manager of Client Services at Baptist Memorial Healthcare in Memphis, Tennessee. I've been with Baptist for about 3 years now, and our team supports all of the end user compute devices throughout the organization. So large spread of devices across the organization. We take care of all of the mobile devices as well. I oversee the MDM. Our team takes care of all things Microsoft 365, and we're also overseeing the VDI infrastructure, the virtual desktop infrastructure, the published applications, and as part of that VDI infrastructure now, Azure Virtual Desktop. And so it's been a fun journey getting to learn Azure Virtual Desktop over the last couple of years, and that's what we'll get to talk about here today. So I'm excited for it. Excited to be here. Fun fact about me. So in my spare time, which is rare or not a lot, I enjoy playing chess and woodworking. And recently I put those two things together and I made my first chessboard. So that's been kind of a fun thing.
Nice.
I'm not very good at either one of those. So yeah, the chessboard is, not very professional looking, but it's been kind of a fun thing to get my mind off of work.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. I love to just, Jacob, your proximity to this technology and really kind of the ground truth of what's happening on the floor and your experience with, dealing with it. I mean, at a very up close and personal level. So I'm stoked that you're here with us today to kind of give your experience and talk through these things. So let's dive in. So Nick, I really wanted to start with you. AVD might be something that is new to folks. It may be a term that folks are not familiar with. They may not be certain exactly maybe the history of it, how it got here, but then also, what is it and what it does? Like, where does it actually sit from a technology standpoint? So maybe first question to you would be can you give us a little bit of background in terms of the history of AVD and kind of what it is and what it does?
Sure, sure. So yeah, Azure Virtual Desktop started at Microsoft in 2019. It was first introduced as Windows Virtual Desktop. We introduced a multi-session, Windows 10, something new at the time. In 2021, it was rebranded to AVD to reflect deeper Azure integration and the ARM-based management. Since then, Microsoft has phased out the classic model of AVD with the fully supported and the fully support ends in 2026, to be honest with you. Today, though, AVD is a core platform for our hybrid work, especially in industries like healthcare, finance, and that need secure and scalable desktop delivery. It's really your mechanism to deliver a robust virtual desktop to end users, essentially delivering all these various applications, especially applications similar to Epic, to the end users, essentially in a secure fashion.
Awesome. Just real quick, because I think one thing that might be interesting too is Win365 versus AVD, and maybe just like 5 seconds on kind of how they're different or what, both of those terms might be used out in the industry, and both of them are offerings from Microsoft. So maybe give us the folks on the call just a little bit of context on the differences between those.
Some of the major differences come around the way that you can customize and integrate the actual solution itself. Whether or not the Microsoft 365, which encompasses the ability to tack in and manage multiple multiple applications on the side of Microsoft to be delivered to end users, whereas AVD is more of a virtualized desktop that you can deliver, or where you can have whatever you want to install on there. Microsoft 365 is more of a very honed in focused delivery that doesn't necessarily offer all of the robustness that you can utilize on AVD.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing in our world. We're seeing healthcare organizations be a little bit more aligned to an AVD model just because of the control that they have and the flexibility that they have through the different stack of technology versus like the Win365. But I know there's a lot of parallels between the two.
Yeah,
so
I was just going to say that. They're almost built on the same exact technology stack, to be honest with you.
Exactly. So one question I have for you, Nick, I'm seeing a lot of interest and increase over the last, let's say, 5 years in things like VDI, application virtualization. Organizations seem to be leaning more and more towards a centralized way of delivering some of their apps. Kind of curious from your perspective, what are you seeing? Are you seeing organizations kind of lean more towards VDI, and kind of why do you think that might be?
Absolutely. I mean, VDI and app virtualization has surged in popularity, due to a rise in remote work, hybrid work, which demands secure, flexible access to corporate devices from anywhere. And, these solutions have to be centralized with, in accordance with the applications. And this reduces risk, for breaches and supporting cybersecurity strategies for zero trust. They also streamline IT operations, by simplifying patching and scaling and policy enforcement. In healthcare platforms like Epic initially, which relies heavily on VDI to deliver, secure access to the electronic health records, but are now shifting towards native cloud integration with Azure. It reduces the need for traditional VDI in some environments.
Oh, so I'm kind of curious, talking about that as it pertains to AVD, why do you think there's such a large interest right now in AVD? Like, why have we seen just the uptick in conversations and questions about that kind of substantially? What's your take on that?
I mean, the interest in AVD is surging, due to the convergence of financial, strategic, and operational pressures. Many organizations are facing license renewal fatigue, sticker shock from legacy VDI platforms, prompting them to explore more cost-effective alternatives like AVD. However, even AVD's cost savings potential has narrowed a little bit. Some customers report savings have dropped a little bit from earlier expectations. Still, AVD remains a very attractive, replacement for current VDIs in the actual market.
One of the things I'll highlight too that I think a customer actually brought this to my attention was, it's used from a ransomware protection perspective, right? So the idea of saying, well, if I've got my on-prem virtualization infrastructure and that infrastructure gets ransomware, I don't have capacity for me to like stand up another presentation tier for Epic or another VDI tier for my apps and my users. And so the ability to kind of have more of a cloud native solution that's the presentation VDI app virtualization type system, where it's in the cloud, it's native in the cloud, and that management plane is abstracted from you as part of your infrastructure that could even get ransomware. It allows when I've heard from customers is that's part of their strategy when it comes to dealing with a ransomware event that they hope never happens, but if it did happen, they like that they have technologies like AVD to be able to more rapidly respond to them and bring their services back up.
Yeah, I mean that in tandem with our authenticator application, right? And AVD, which will ensure that in the context of an enterprise that's compromised by ransomware, they can then be rest assured that the devices that those users are actually logging into the environment, the isolated recovery environment, which is our backup of backups, are actually not compromised. And then utilizing AVD and Entra on our side and or ADDS, whichever you prefer, to deliver them their user credentials for login, you can ensure then that those users are accessing the environment securely and they're not accessing with compromised devices after you've already been compromised at a larger scale. So
so definitely there's a lot of characteristics, a lot of aspects to it. I think one of the questions I've got with AVD kind of in its current form being, I would say, a little bit newer to healthcare, right? In healthcare, we've kind of standardized on just a couple technology stacks in the past, right? So this is kind of a newer technology to the game. What would you say to CIOs or CTOs who are maybe experiencing some hesitancy around, is it the right time to displace it? Can they displace it? Is it ready? What would you maybe say to those folks?
So Azure Virtual Desktop is still considered relatively new, as you stated. It's a newer offering in Microsoft's portfolio, okay, especially in the context of healthcare, where stability, compliance, performance, and these things are always all non-negotiable. This newness naturally brings some hesitancy by many CIOs and CTOs that are asking whether AVD is truly mission critical ready for a workload like Epic. That skepticism is valid, but it's also being actively addressed by Microsoft. We've made significant strides in closing feature gaps and building out healthcare specific roadmaps, as well as partnering closely with our Epic on Azure validated AVD partners like yourself, Curtis, which have helped enable us to help build confidence by showcasing the real world deployments, lessons learned, while Epic maintains a cautious stance sometimes. We are working to align messaging as well as capabilities, ensuring that AVD is not just technically viable, but strategically aligned to healthcare's needs for security, performance, and disaster recovery.
Yeah, it's a good thing to call out that in healthcare, right, there doesn't tend to be a substantial amount of kind of mavericks kind of going at it on their own from a technology standpoint, right? There tends to be a desire for folks to see, okay, has this been proven? A lot of other people use this. Is this the majority now? Now I feel comfortable in kind of making that decision. And that's, while AVD and the technology is there, it is ready, there is, a sense of kind of market adoption that I think people are still kind of watching, right? And I think Epic's watching, and I think a lot of folks are kind of watching what everybody does. That's, again, kind of part of why we bring Baptist here and why we have conversations like this, is so that as emerging technologies kind of come out and have a lot of opportunity to improve the service delivery for organizations, that the folks can kind of hear what's going on out there. So, that's a great segue, I guess, to Jacob then. So, it's great to talk in, industry terms and healthcare in general and things like that. But one of the reasons we wanted Jacob to join us in this conversation was, we wanted to hear folks that were living with it, like folks that were having to run and operate on it, and see what their users had to say and see what the gaps were, and working with you guys on improving those gaps and things like that. So, Jacob, thanks for joining us here today. I'm so glad that you're here and get to, chat with us about this. Kind of curious to start from the beginning a little bit. What limitations or frustrations was it that Baptist Memorial was dealing with that, caused you to even look at an alternative solution?
Yeah, well, I think it's a lot of the things that Nick mentioned previously. We had aging on-prem hardware in our data center that we needed to consider what we were going to do with a large-scale replacement of a lot of that hardware. Were we going to replace it all, or were we going to look to a cloud solution? That was a big question. Answering some of the remote work questions about security and making sure that our data stayed encrypted and in our control. All of those common things that everybody's dealing with. We were no exception to that. And especially as COVID hit, and we were looking at sending people home and figuring out how we were going to manage all that, just like everybody else. We after COVID was tapering down and the panic was over, we were kind of evaluating what we had done well, what we needed to reanalyze, and it was a good opportunity for us to take a look at alternate products, and the licensing costs that you were mentioning, Nick, and that's definitely been a big issue for us here, and trying to have another player out there in the space that we could prove worked, and use that, if nothing else, as a negotiation tactic to say, hey, you guys aren't the only game in town. There's other options for healthcare, and that's kind of what got us started on the journey. So we really dove in headfirst about 18 months ago, and got the so it started out pretty small with basic proof of concept stuff, and over the last 18 months or so, we are up to just under 1,000 daily active users, and around 1,500 monthly active users in the AVD space now. So that's kind of what drove us to start, and what we've done over the last 18 months.
Nice. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Also, giving the timetable is helpful for folks to understand. So it was about 18 months ago that you really kind of started heavily focusing on AVD, and that was, we'll get into this in a minute, but there was much earlier stage then, the technology, than it is now, right? It's come a long way in the last 18 months. So it's kind of interesting with the timetable in terms of how long it took for some of that. But one question I've got for you is, what were some of the first steps that you guys took and started with from an AVD perspective that helped you set up for success and helped this be something that you guys continue to pursue?
Well, one of the first things we had to do was just say, are we ready for it? Are we as a staff ready for it? Do we have expertise in-house? And do we have folks that are able to skill up and learn that, or already have some background with AVD? And we've got a great team here, but we didn't have any real experience with AVD, and so we had to look at augmenting our staff, and really, one of the first things that we did was actually to reach out to Optimum Healthcare and ask for help, to find others who had that level of expertise, who could help to upskill our folks and bring us up to speed on the newer technology. And that's really where we started, was just figuring out, hey, who are the experts in the field, who can we reach out to and get some help to get us off the ground. And that's where, again, Optimum came in and really helped us to jumpstart the work that we've done so far. And so that was our starting point. And getting that, once we had identified, who was going to be doing who we were going to be working with on this, then we, obviously went through an initial pilot where we just got a very basic build of the OS going, with basic Office apps and, kind of back end common applications for, your Office suite, your PDF stuff, printing, network design, and making sure that all of our security team was on board with policies for Windows 11, and making sure the network design was established and solid and trustworthy, and got that, again, that early on basic build up and running. And from there, we were able to really launch forward pretty aggressively.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I think one of the key things that I think we learned with you guys, and you guys learned along the way, right, was just the need for validation early, right? The need for proof of concept environments, pilot environments, the need to learn along that path as well too, which is suited you guys quite well in your journey by kind of starting small and not just diving in with head first. You guys really kind of put the foot in and the toe in. That I think helped you guys long term with how all that played out. Now, I think we would be lying if we said that the last 18 months were 100% smooth and had zero, bumps along the way, and it was all perfect. And so, one of the things that this is probably the most valuable thing that I think the listeners can hear is, what were the things along the way that you learned that were bumps, that were challenges you guys faced? What ones, how do you guys overcome? Which ones maybe are still out there that we're working with Microsoft on, things like that? Kind of curious for you to give, maybe not the litany, but just, give us your perspective in terms of the bumps that were along the way and what took place.
Yeah, you're not lying. It was the journey has not been without bumps in the road for sure, and I'll try to hit some of those with the listeners here today. One of the main things that we wanted to do, or one of the things, I shouldn't say main thing, but one of the things we wanted to tackle was our image management. So we have been doing virtual VDI image management in a really traditional fashion for, as long as we've been doing VDI here, where we bundle up our VDI image, we install all of our apps, we patch them, and then we sysprep everything and push it out to all of our target endpoints. And what we wanted to do with AVD, or one of the early goals, was to take more of a DevOps approach so that we could be doing our builds more regularly, get more agile with it, be pushing more frequent updates with smaller changes, and just be a lot more controlled with the number of changes that we're going into each build. And so we set forth to actually utilize Azure Image Builder, AIB, to accomplish that. And unfortunately, this is, like I said, one of the bumps along the way. We weren't able to get Azure Image Builder fully up and operational. That's a tool that Microsoft's got out there, basically kind of images code, where you can modularize each component along the way and build out your image, push it out to all of your endpoints, and then every time you do a build, you have a fresh install of the OS. It's not just a capture of a point-in-time image, but it's actually the bits were installed for the OS and all the apps along the way. And so that's something that we hit some snags, and part of that might have been due to our staffing limitations. And I know that the Optimum team worked with us to try to get that going, and ultimately we haven't gotten there yet. So we had to pivot from our original plan to use that methodology, and we are back to more of a traditional build. So that's something that we are at a point now where we would like to revisit that, and whether we're going to use Azure Image Builder or a third-party tool to try to get to more of that DevOps management. That's where we'd like to be. That's going to help our team make it more sustainable for us in the long haul. But that was one of the early bumps in the road, and that we had to get across, and then we'll be coming back to it here in the near future.
Yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate you sharing that. What else? What are other items?
Yeah, so another one that we were kind of scratching our head on was we ran into some issues with our client-side memory. So we had some older hardware out there that we thought, hey, that all we have to do is throw on a lightweight client onto these thin clients that are out in the field, and they'll connect right up with Azure with AVD, and we'll be off and running. But what we learned along the way was that with the way that Teams does video processing, I say Teams specifically, but there are other applications too that offload a lot of the heavy-duty video processing onto the local endpoint. And so we had these thin clients out there that actually vendor recommendations were no page file on that endpoint, and lightweight memory on the endpoint. But as applications like Teams and others, like I said, do offloading of that memory or that video processing onto the local endpoint, it was clobbering the memory on those endpoints. And so we knew that the hardware was old and needed to be replaced anyway, but that kind of, I mean, there was a life cycle management stuff going on. So just like everybody out there that's listening in, we've got multiple projects in flight, right? One of them was replacing the endpoints. One of them was, dealing with the virtual environment. But we really had to make sure that anybody who was making a leap to AVD was getting that newer hardware. And it's not crazy requirements or anything, but if you're, thin clients that you've got out there, have dedicated video memory, that's going to be a big plus, or just make sure to boost up the memory on those local devices was something that we found very helpful. And ultimately, we actually did decide to actually enable the page files on those devices against the vendor recommendation, at the risk of maybe burning out some SSDs a little earlier than normal. But that was something that we did have a hurdle that we got across. And one other thing though is that Microsoft has done a lot of work to improve the team's experience. And so when we started this journey, we were on the legacy teams build. I think they flipped it to calling it the new teams. I don't know if that was probably about a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago. And that change was a significant improvement. And so having that kind of built for AVD, built for Azure kind of experience with the tight integration with Teams was very, it was a significant improvement along the journey with that, but also the hardware issue that I talked about there. So in addition to the hardware issues, another big thing that we ran into is just keeping the software up to date. So when we started our journey, the app that was the client app that we were using and still are using right now is the remote desktop app. And that I know Microsoft is working to phase that out and phase in the Windows app. So keeping that client up to date, most of we talk to our help desk team, the majority of the issues that we have are where there's a pending update for that remote desktop app. It's updated frequently. It's still updated frequently, but keeping that up to date it really is going to help you solve a lot of the problems with people getting disconnected or having poor performance. A lot of it's that client-based or a client-based issue. We are working to make the leap to the Windows app. Those users who have adopted it have given us really great feedback, and we really haven't seen any major issues with it. And so, again, it's something like Nick was saying earlier, that Microsoft has the bugs in the system, but they're working them out. And I'm not just saying that. Every time we've come across, some kind of major issue, Microsoft's done a nice job, getting us access to people like Nick and others on his team that we've been able to connect with and grow with in this journey. So those are a couple of the key things. Oh, one last one that I was going to touch on, Curtis, was vendor support for applications. There's a lot of vendors out there that are, they hear there's a new virtual platform out there, and kind of like what I don't remember who said it, Nick or Curtis, you, about being a maverick in the arena. Everybody wants the proven PSTN network that's just ironclad and no outages or anything, but so a lot of people, here it's on a new technology, a new platform, and they're hesitant to offer support for that. And one of the good things is, there's kind of two flavors of vendors out there. There's the ones that they don't want to be on the bleeding edge, but then there's the other ones that are like, hey, they see the industry shifting and they want to make their tool work on what is going to be a major player in the space. And so we've had we've had kind of a mixed experience with vendor support and vendor engagement. Some of them have been, gone out and hired development teams, full teams of developers to make their utilities work with AVD, and they've worked with us closely throughout that to get early edition of their builds into our hands, so that we can do some work with them to further their product and make sure that their product is going to be ready for AVD. Others not so much. So it's kind of been a mixed bag with those third-party vendors. Who's going to step up to the plate and try to make it happen versus who is going to sit on the sidelines and wait to see how things shake out.
And I just want to say, from the Microsoft standpoint, we encourage you to push those vendors to us. We want to talk to them.
and we've done that. I mean, to an extent. I mean, there's some that have been really good.
Well, and to that point, that's why I think a lot, like our recommendation when folks are starting that journey, right, is to start off with essentially two things, right, which is a proof of concept environment to like help learn and help get familiar with it and validate, but then also to start with an assessment, to start looking at the technology endpoints, the peripheral support, looking at the application inventory that you've got, right? Where does that sit in terms of, are these third parties? And it's funny because we've seen this throughout the last year where application vendors are at first resistant. Say, well, hold on, we haven't tested it. And then we say it's Windows 11. And they go, oh, okay, if it's Windows 11, then okay, then fine, we're good. So there's definitely been like just a little bit of knowledge sharing that's necessary with some of these vendors to get them more comfortable in terms of what the technology actually is. Because, I mean, you remember when the other virtualization technologies came out 15 years ago, and it was like every vendor was like, well, hold on now, we don't support that. We don't support, and then now it's, it's the standard. Everyone needs to support that, right? And so we're kind of seeing a similar conversation. It's just a lot easier this go around than last round. So yeah, Jacob, I appreciate you sharing kind of some of those highlights of the bumps along the ways for folks that are listening to kind of learn from and hear from, as well as, just hearing that there are bumps, but there are bumps with any technology, but it really just comes down to how quickly are we addressing those bumps? How engaged is someone like Microsoft, addressing that and putting out fixes and things like that? Because every technology's got issues and should be made better. And we all have to be kind of seeing those investments to know that the right technologies. But one question I want to ask too is, obviously you talk through some of the bumps and things, but what are some of the improvements that you've seen with AVD? I mean, I know we talked cost and the reasons why and some of that stuff, but what are some of the experiences that you've seen that have also gotten better as well too? But yeah, all in all, what improvements would you say exist as you guys are adopting AVD?
Well, cost is definitely one of them. So like we've talked about all along, I mentioned the hardware refresh that was needed. We definitely had significant CapEx savings and not having to refresh a chunk of our data center hardware. And then in addition to that, the user experience has really been solid. We had a lot of people, I'm going to go back to the Teams experience. A lot of people were struggling with a good Teams performance over VDI. And I'll tell you what, on those, those knowledge workers that live in Outlook and Excel and Teams all day long, this has been a great transition for those folks. It's really been a positive user experience for them, especially within Teams, because in our previous environment, people were just there was lag, there was dropped calls, mics weren't working, cameras weren't working, screen sharing was terrible, and Teams has just improved drastically for our user experience there, and so that's been a really big one. Another
big piece of feedback, by the way, Jacob, we've worked tirelessly to continue to enhance Teams to work with AVD at a way faster from a performance standpoint, supportability too, to help support the AVD, actual deployment. So that is something we continue to work on, and we'll keep getting you those updates so that way it gets better and better.
Yeah, and Teams calling was another one. We've got a mixed environment when it comes to our telephony solutions, and our incumbent provider or our telephony utility is one of those vendors that hasn't made it into the AVD space with their client. So again, it's that AV offloading component where you've got to have your local agent for the offloading of that voice processing. They haven't provided that for us yet. And so the users that have made the leap over to AVD are full-fledged with Teams voice, and that's been worked out really well for them. There's some integration issues that we still have to get through with some of our call center software and the integration points there. But overall, the leap to Teams Voice and the AVD platform has been really solid. And one thing I didn't mention earlier in how we chose to deploy this, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead on the questionnaires here, but is we opted to deploy first to our knowledge worker folks. So I didn't really touch on that. Our back office users more so than our clinical staff. And so we wanted to make sure that we had, again, with the development, we wanted to start with the people who, weren't patient care facing. And so that was one thing that we did that I think helped us get to where we are today. And now we're ready to make the leap into possibly into some of those clinical areas and make that transition out of just the back office, but to the patient facing areas as well.
And just to be clear, you are using Epic within your AVD environment, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, when I say back office, we've got actually one of our biggest use cases is our remote coders. They're in Epic, their entire shift. So yeah, they're using it heavily, and yeah, and Epic has been one of the vendors that has been great to work with as well. They helped us get some registration scripts sorted out so that throughout the image management process that the host gets registered within Epic correctly and right the right roles and profile within Epic.
And Jacob just touched on something I want to mention is that, based on our current status with Epic, we are in exploratory as they deem it. But as you can hear from Jacob, they are supporting us 100%. They are pushing to support AVD to be a larger rollout. And we continue to meet with them constantly to continue to figure out where we have to go, what we have to do to make sure we get to that on target status as quickly as possible.
Yep. And there's, identity providers are another one that's going to be key for all of our health, all of us, in order to get up and going fully with AVD. We're going to need those identity providers, your tap badge providers on board. And I know that they're working on, that support of AVD very heavily. So that's a key one, and just the different third-party integrations with Epic, those are going to come behind Epic, and a lot of those we've already worked through. So we've proven that it can work. Now it's just taking the next step and rolling it out towards more of those clinical areas.
Awesome. So last question for you is, what advice would you have for other healthcare technology leaders that are considering AVD, right? If they called you up and said, what would you tell me or advise me to do? What would you tell them?
Certainly I'd say, don't go it alone. Having a solid partner who's been there before helping out. I'll just give Curtis and his team a plug. They've been great to work with all along, and get connected with somebody like Nick at Microsoft who can also help you to escalate. So engage your Microsoft rep to help along the way. They're eager to help in this space for sure. It's a target area for them. So I think everybody's been great to work with. That's why I'm here today, is because these guys have been awesome to help us through the journey. And so don't go it alone and get some help for sure. But then also, I think that our approach was pretty sound in starting with those non-clinical workers, the non-clinical staff members, and getting them engaged and showing them the improvements in the performance, the stability, the flexibility. Heck, you can put it on, you can get connected from anywhere, which is awesome, and that might be true of some other players as well. But it's really been good from the end user perspective, in addition to the business perspective of it. So I think starting with those back office users is a big one, like I mentioned, and then making sure like that app inventory. That's been one of the things for us that we've had to struggle through and make sure that we're talking to our vendors and figuring out, are we ready to add the next application in? What are the requirements for this department? Getting those things knocked out. Make sure that you plan ahead for those things and get your user profiles built out so that you know exactly what apps are going to be needed by a particular team, so you know if they're ready for it or not.
And I just want to give Jacob a big one up there too. He doesn't know this, but because of the work he's done and the work he's done with Optimum, you guys pretty much helped shape or frame our approach to rolling out AVD. You really did with a lot of the work you've done across the various customers, and especially with the way you guys rolled it out, Jacob. It made it kind of a lot simpler for us to understand how it would be most appropriate to roll it out with the rest of the healthcare organizations that we work with. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Well, yeah, like I said, it wouldn't have been possible without you. One other thing that I wanted to touch on here on the rollout perspective is this is really kind of the next layer in your overall cloud journey. If we back up, 10, 15 years, I don't know how long ago it's been when we started first talking about the cloud and what the cloud meant. In order to make the leap to the cloud, whatever, you had to get your identity nailed down, then you had to get email, then you had to get your data virtualized and out there. So you did your OneDrive migrations and your SharePoint migrations, and then the next logical step is what we've been talking about here today, just getting the desktops virtualized and the applications virtualized. Is really the next kind of wave of that cloud movement. And so it's, make sure that you have all those things in place before you dive into AVD. And I think that hopefully most people that are listening in have already gotten there. If we're having this conversation, that hopefully that stuff is in place. But we do still have some legacy data on-prem shared folders, and that was one of the bugs that I didn't mention earlier. Getting that data over to SharePoint Online is critical to the ease of searchability for that data, because some of the indexing doesn't work well between the on-prem shared files and the Azure native stuff. So getting through those first wave of your cloud adoption is going to make the AVD stuff way easier, and that really goes for any kind of VDI.
Awesome. Well, Jacob, thank you so much. I feel like the experience that you've walked in the last 18 months is like something that everybody can learn from, and something that's really valuable with this conversation, probably more so than anything Nick or I has to say. So I appreciate you sharing that. Nick, I'm kind of curious if anything else you'd want to add about what's Microsoft doing here, and as it pertains to kind of healthcare's adoption from AVD. Anything else you want to add in that area?
Yeah, I mean, so AVD opens up new possibilities in healthcare by enabling secure, scalable access to clinical and administrative applications for virtually any device without the complexity of traditional VDI per se. It supports flexible deployments, models like private workstations, shared kiosks, virtual kiosks, which are ideal for clinicians in many settings that work across multiple locations. It also aligns with disaster recovery ransomware protection strategies to give hospitals a quick, easy way to restore access to clinical apps like Epic during outages. It's also a strong fit for organizations to modernize aging infrastructure, as Jacob mentioned too. And it also, you reduce the requirement on other VDIs from a licensing perspective, and any dependency therefore. So you can extend your desktop virtualization beyond apps to full clinical desktops, and then healthcare systems with hybrid workforces and remote clinics, or a need for rapid scaling, especially during surges or onboarding, stand up most.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I want to highlight on that note too, and this is something I talk about kind of in cloud in general, but I think it's an important takeaway with some of this as we think about kind of a cloud native or more cloud centric VDI solutions. Most organizations that have a VDI or a presentation tier, and they've got 1,000 servers or something, and that's maybe hosted on 80 or 150 blades or UCS chassis or things like that. And they don't refresh all of them all at once, right? So they usually every quarter, they do a quarter every year, 25% every year, and they're kind of always, it depends what the user experience is going to be on, depending on kind of what gear they end up getting connected to when they launch their session and things like that, right? And one of the great things I think about cloud and AVD is that when the next chipset comes out, when the next instance type comes out, when the next SKUs come out, is that you don't have to sit there and say, I've got to plan this capital refresh to try to get to the latest performing gear. It's like we can just next reboot, we can just scale it up. It's just there, right? So those are some of the things that I feel like are sometimes not considered when you think, oh, it's the same as this. It's like, well, not really. There's some very specific characteristics that make it very different. So awesome. Well, I really appreciate the conversation and the candidness and kind of talking through where things are at, where things are going, what your guys' experiences have been. At this point, I would love to bring Larry on for us to do some of the Q&A. Larry's been watching kind of the questions that have been coming in. And so, Larry, if you wouldn't mind proctoring our Q&A session for us.
Certainly, yeah. And that was a really educational session right there. So I appreciate Jacob and Nick sharing their expertise here. And we actually have a good deal of questions here, so I'll try to go through these as quickly as we can. The first question we have here is, what are the main differences between AVD and VDI to make this solution stand out?
Yeah, well, for us, it's cloud native. So the fact that it's a Microsoft product, we're obviously tight partners with Microsoft, and we're fully entrenched into the Microsoft ecosystem. And so being a part of that, it simplifies a number of things from the support perspective to just the ease of familiarity that we have with administrative centers and things like that. And so that, I think that's probably one of the main standout differences between that and really, again, just the fact that it's cloud native, and we didn't have to set up a ton of, we had to establish a network link between Azure and our on-prem network, and that was about it from the infrastructure setup. There wasn't a lot more. Well, I shouldn't say that. There wasn't a lot more to it. The Optimum team helped with a lot of those details, but the cloud native aspect, the scalability of it made it really simple for us. And I know that they're not only cloud native tool in the toolbox, but it definitely worked well for us.
Great.
I would just real quick, I would just add to that as well too, is that I think when you consider kind of cloud in general and the value proposition of cloud of being able to essentially offset a certain amount of level of effort to essentially Microsoft, right? To saying, we're running your data center, don't have to worry about that. We're running, you've got the management plane, you've got the actual orchestration and the connection brokers, and they're managing essentially that infrastructure and service. That's less work that you have to do, right? That's less of the activities that you have to focus on, which, I use this term a lot with cloud, which is, the goal for cloud is to decrease the amount of commoditized activities that we do so we can focus more on differentiated activities, right? And so I would say that AVD aligns in that space, which is there's a list of things that you no longer have to do when you're on a VDI solution like AVD versus an alternative, because it's intended to essentially allow you to shift your resources right and focus more on that user experience and what the users are in, business is interested in, and not just the commoditized activities like patching brokers and things like that.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks for that added insight. Nick, I think this one's maybe more tailored towards you, but how does AVD handle high availability requirements for critical clinical applications?
In context of high availability from a disaster recovery standpoint, or from, well, we'll just say all up. At Microsoft, we have a standard way of deploying applications for various workloads. Now, in the context of Epic, And in regard to the way that AVD stays up as a high availability application would be 100% dependent upon, not dependent, I'm sorry, deployed in the way that we deploy our applications. It's basically the sense that it's going to be deployed across a multi-zonal region within a geolocation of the actual client, and that you will basically have the accessibility to those needed computes at any given time, just like you do any other resource. Yeah.
I'll add a little bit too. So some of the designs that we've done and implemented with some of the customers is, the ability. So with any of the other presentation technologies we're referring to or things like that, right? The idea is having multiple regions for them to be able to service capacity out of. And there's a lot of options when it comes to AVD about using multiple regions by default and having users spread across multiple regions from that like active perspective, or an active passive, active pilot light. There's a lot of options that exist beyond like what exists within a region, and having multiple availability zones and having that spread as a service across multiple ones is intrinsically providing high availability. But then there is the ability to have an entire duplication of that in another region to also be able to support that as well too. So similar to how we would architect something like an Epic or something like these other mission critical applications, AVD has the capacity and the intent to be able to share kind of very similar characteristics from an HA and DR perspective.
Yeah, and just to add some detail on our specific deployment, we opted for hosting out of a single regional data center with an option to fail over to a secondary DR zone. So I think we're out of US East 2 for our primary data center, and somewhere in the central region for our DR site. Going active with two different zones does have some implications for your image management and your deployments. When you roll new images out to you have to roll them out across both, and so what we do is we keep everything in a single region, and then we basically just have some scripts that copy everything to our DR region so that we could spin it up if needed.
Great. All right, so this question, Jacob, I would say mainly targeted towards you, and of course, whatever you can share without giving away any secret sauce or anything to Baptist as much as you want to share. But so the slew of questions this one. So are you hosting your own Epic or using Epic hosted is the first part of the question.
Yes, we host our own Epic, and we're also we have some Community Connect users as well. So we host a fairly large Epic environment.
Okay, and the second piece of that was, are you delivering primary care through AVD or more of the back office?
Definitely more of the back office, and that was really a strategic plan that from the beginning of this was to start with that back office and then see where we were at to determine whether we were ready to make the leap to primary care or not. And so again, that's kind of what I talked about earlier with the rollout recommendation that we came up with, was to take that route. And now we are starting to pilot AVD with a few of our ambulatory areas and starting to dabble in that. But right now, it's definitely the back office, the bulk of our current users.
All right, and I think the third piece of this question probably relates back to the first part, since you're hosting it yourself. One of our listeners was asking if there was any reason why you're not using the Epic Web client over a hosted solution, but I think because you're hosting your own, that wouldn't come into play, right?
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm on the infrastructure side of the house more so than the Epic app side. So we're really following the Epic team's lead on the delivery mechanism. So we haven't talked too significantly about the web client at this point.
Okay. So I've got a couple more questions here. So how much line of sight do you give AVD Windows 365 desktop users to your data center?
So it's really an extension of our data center, and there are some network segmentation things that the networking team did to carve out what applications really are needed to be accessed from AVD, but that's really not any different than what it would be like if you were coming from any of our other sites across our organization. And so it's really just like any other compute device out there on our network, and that has been really good from an end user experience, because they just kind of don't care where they're coming from. They're going to get the same experience no matter what it is.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. Nick, this one is directed towards you. I'd assume. How does Microsoft ensure that AVD remains HIPAA compliant out of the box?
Yeah, that's a good question. AVD is built on Azure, and which means HIPAA and high trust standards are built in. Microsoft provides compliance documentation and tools to help organizations configure AVD securely for day-to-day ops from day one. So.
From day one, okay. So I know throughout the the webinar we were talking about how Baptist and Jacob mentioned this a few times about they're doing about 18 months right now. But is there a typical timeline from initial exploration to full go live for an average health system with AVD?
Full go live. From my standpoint, I want to hear what Curtis said. From my standpoint, it's like it should be like initial exploration to full. I mean, it could be maybe 3 to 6 months, but it could be a lot longer depending on the depth of the testing necessary, how many third-party perennials they have, devices they have, how much other additional integration do they have. So it's going to really depend on how many additional layered applications are built in there on top of things like Epic, for instance.
Yeah. I'll add is that our suggestion, right, is we've got about a 6 to 8 week kind of assessment and POC phase that we always want to start with. And then out of that, we produce what the rollout plan looks like, because the rollout plan, again, depending on the organization's strategy, what their goals are and what they're trying to accomplish with AVD, whether it's just external access and back office, are they trying to displace some of their current stuff, full replacement, all those variables come into what they could be. But I'll say that rolling out and displacing a delivery or app virtualization or VDI solution, it's usually not a quick turn. There's a lot of components to it. There's a lot of integration points. There's a lot of vendors involved. You want to go slow and methodical, so you're finding these things early and you're not having a bunch of people experience the same issue. So I would say go planning earlier than you need. 12 to 18 months is the ballpark I would give for folks in terms of this, given where AVD is today. I would say 12 to 18 months, but again, there's a lot of variables there that you got to go into. It could be as much as 2 years.
Yeah. My recommendation was based on if AVD was good to go in your organization. There was not a lot of testing to go.
Well, my 12 to 18 months includes the extra couple months on the front end for the assessment and things like that. So if you've got, let's say, a license renewal that is 2 years out, now's the time to start talking about it, right? If it's 18 months out, now's the time. If it's 6 months out, you may not have enough runway.
And to your point, Curtis, I've had customers approach us about that and ask me, is AVD able to be put in place in the next couple of months? And I had to tell them, no, you're just going to have to sign the new license agreement. I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do right there.
I think it's important to say, right, not every health system is created equally, and everybody's going to have their own different environment, and with each different environment comes a different deployment plan and needs and so forth. But anyway, so that concludes all of our questions, Curtis. So
awesome. Well, thanks, Larry, for brokering that. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jacob, for joining us today. For all those that have watched live or are going to watch this later on, really appreciate you guys joining and tuning in. If you guys have any follow-up questions and things like that, you can reach out to us. But we really appreciate the time invested by Jacob and Nick here, and all those that are listening. So everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.